brothers and sisters across Africa, and to our family throughout the global Black diaspora. Today I want to speak about a pattern unfolding in world politics, one many people notice but few fully understand. When most people watch the conflicts taking place in the Middle East, attention often focuses on the visible scenes of war. The headlines show missile strikes, air raids, and confrontations between powerful states. News coverage centers on explosions, military movements, and rising tensions between governments. But when we step back and study the deeper structure behind these events, another picture begins to emerge. Beneath the visible battlefield lies something more complex than tanks or fighter jets. Across a wide stretch of the region, from Gaza to Lebanon, from Iraq and Syria down toward Yemen, a network has gradually taken shape over many years. This structure does not resemble a traditional army marching under a single flag. Instead, it resembles a web of movements, alliances, and relationships that influence conflicts across several countries at once. Some observers describe this network as Iran's hidden military reach. Others refer to it as the axis of resistance. The name, however, is less important than the underlying method. What deserves attention is the strategy behind the structure. Unlike empires of the past, Iran did not expand influence across these territories through large-scale invasions. There were no columns of tanks rolling across borders and no massive occupation armies sent to control foreign lands. The approach followed a different path. Influence grew slowly through alliances, long-term relationships, training programs, and cooperation with movements already rooted within their own societies. This is an important lesson for Africa and for the wider global south. If we want to understand how power operates in modern geopolitics, we must move beyond the simple image of armies and weapons. Power does not always come from the size of the military force a nation deploys. Often, power grows from the networks and partnerships a nation patiently builds over time. To understand how this regional network came into existence, we must first look at one of the institutions responsible for shaping it. States that operate under constant external pressure often develop complex systems of defense. Instead of relying on one strategy alone, they create multiple layers of protection and influence. Iran followed this pattern. Within its military structure, a specialized unit emerged known as the Quds Force, a branch of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Unlike conventional military formations whose main responsibility lies in defending national borders, this unit carried a broader mission. Its purpose extended beyond Iran's territory. The Quds Force focused on building relationships with movements and groups throughout the Middle East. Rather than concentrating only on direct warfare, the strategy emphasized long-term partnerships, training, advisory support, and coordination with allied organizations across the region. Over the years, fighters from different countries received military instruction, strategic guidance, and assistance in building stronger organizational structures. Intelligence sharing and logistical cooperation allowed several of these groups to improve their capabilities and strengthen their internal systems. What stands out about this approach is the patience behind it. This network did not appear overnight. Its formation required decades of political relationships, regional conflicts, and shifting alliances. Gradually, connections formed between groups operating in different countries. Some partnerships developed into deep institutional relationships. Others remained flexible arrangements that activated when shared interests aligned. When examined closely, the goal becomes clearer. The objective was not simply to form scattered militias. The aim was to construct a wider architecture of influence capable of operating across borders without requiring traditional military occupation. Once this architecture began to take shape, the network continued expanding. Groups operating in separate countries gradually became linked through training, coordination, shared intelligence, and overlapping strategic goals. What began as limited cooperation eventually connected forces in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Gaza, and later Yemen. Looking at the map today reveals something important. This strategy was never about controlling a single battlefield. It focused on shaping influence across an entire region. When discussing the pillars of this network, the story must begin with Lebanon. Among all the places where this strategy unfolded, Lebanon stands as one of the most significant examples. Hezbollah did not begin as the highly organized force seen today. The movement emerged during the conflicts of the 1980s, a period when Lebanon was already deeply affected by civil war, foreign intervention, and internal political divisions. Over time, the organization underwent a dramatic transformation. Through sustained training, battlefield experience, and careful organizational development, Hezbollah evolved from a local resistance movement into one of the most disciplined non-state military forces operating in the world today. When we study this transformation carefully, the importance of long-term partnerships becomes clear. His relationship with Hezbollah involved more than the transfer of weapons or financial assistance. The relationship focused on building a structured military and political organization capable of sustaining itself across generations. Training programs helped develop professional command hierarchies. Fighters gained experience across multiple conflicts. Military thinking evolved as well, allowing the group to combine guerrilla tactics with more conventional forms of warfare. Today Hezbollah maintains a large arsenal of missiles and a highly coordinated command structure. Its presence along Israel's northern border has created one of the most significant deterrent forces within the region. Yet there is another lesson within this story, one Africa should examine carefully. Hezbollah's strength did not emerge quickly. Its development required years of discipline, organization, and deep connections with the society in which it operates. At the same time, the movement maintains strategic alliances beyond Lebanon's borders. Once a movement reaches that level of organization, it stops functioning only as a local force. It becomes a strategic actor capable of shaping the balance of power across a wider region. And Lebanon represented only the first major pillar of the system. Further east, another crucial arena began to take shape: Iraq. After Lebanon, the next major theater within this regional structure lies further east, in Iraq and Syria. When we carefully examine the geography of the Middle East, the importance of these two countries becomes clear. Geography alone explains much of their strategic value. Iraq sits between Iran and the broader Arab world. Syria, in turn, connects Iraq to Lebanon and the Mediterranean coastline. Together, these two countries form a corridor that links several key areas of the region. Control or influence along this corridor provides significant strategic advantages. Over time, Iraq became home to numerous militia groups that emerged during years of conflict and instability. Some of these organizations gained prominence during the struggle against ISIS. Many of them eventually became part of the Popular Mobilization Forces, a coalition that played a significant role in fighting extremist groups. During this period, some of these militias developed closer relationships with Iran. Through training programs, advisory support, and political connections, ties strengthened between certain Iraqi factions and Iranian institutions. But Iraq should not be understood merely as a battlefield. Iraq functions as a bridge. Through Iraq, different elements of the regional network maintain connections with one another. Movement of personnel, transfer of equipment, and strategic coordination can occur across borders through this geographic link. Syria then became the next critical connection in this chain. When the Syrian civil war began, the country quickly turned into one of the most complex conflict zones in modern geopolitics. Numerous regional and international actors entered the conflict. Each supported different factions and pursued their own strategic goals. Iran chose to support the Syrian government while coordinating with allied groups operating on the ground. By maintaining influence inside Syria, the wider network remained connected from Iran through Iraq and eventually to Lebanon. When we step back and observe this corridor as a whole, its importance becomes clearer. This situation does not revolve solely around individual conflicts inside Iraq or Syria. Instead, it revolves around maintaining a continuous line of influence across several countries. This corridor allows coordination, communication, and logistical support to travel across a wide geographic area. Once such a corridor exists, the network can expand even further. And this expansion leads us to another crucial front within the Middle East, Gaza. Gaza represents one of the most sensitive and closely watched areas in the region. For decades, this narrow strip of land has lived under constant tension. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has shaped the political and military reality of Gaza for generations. When discussing Gaza, many people view it only through the lens of a local conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. But when we examine the wider regional picture, Gaza also holds a place within the broader strategic environment of the Middle East. Several Palestinian armed movements operate within Gaza. Each group has its own leadership structure, political goals, and historical background. Over the years, some of these movements established different levels of cooperation with Iran. This cooperation reportedly included financial support, military training, and assistance related to certain forms of weapons technology. At the same time, these relationships differ from those seen in Lebanon or Iraq. Palestinian organizations remain primarily focused on their national struggle against Israel. Their strategic decisions arise mainly from the realities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict itself. Their priorities do not always align perfectly with the broader regional calculations of other actors. Even so, Gaza still functions as an important front within the wider geopolitical landscape. When major escalations occur in Gaza, the consequences rarely remain confined to that small territory. Tensions in Gaza often influence political and military calculations across the entire region. This explains why analysts frequently describe Gaza as a pressure point. Local events they can quickly intersect with wider regional dynamics. A crisis in Gaza can affect diplomatic discussions, military readiness, and security planning across multiple countries. When we connect Gaza to the other theaters already discussed, Lebanon to the north, Iraq and Syria forming the eastern corridor, a clearer picture begins to emerge. Multiple fronts exist within the same strategic system. But the network extends even further. If we follow the map southward, another major conflict zone appears. This area lies along one of the most important maritime trade routes in the world. That place is Yemen. Continuing south along the map brings us to another critical arena within this regional landscape, Yemen. At first glance, Yemen might appear distant from the other conflicts already discussed. Yet when we examine the geography of the region more carefully, its importance becomes clear. Yemen sits near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the most significant maritime choke points on the planet. This narrow passage connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden and ultimately to the Indian Ocean. Each year, enormous volumes of global trade and energy shipments move through this corridor. Oil tankers, cargo vessels, and international shipping routes all depend on safe passage through these waters. Because of this location, influence in Yemen carries consequences far beyond the country itself. Control or disruption of this maritime gateway can affect international shipping routes, global energy markets, and the strategic calculations of major world powers. The Houthi movement emerged from Yemen's internal political struggles. Over time, it developed into a powerful military and political force within the country. Through years of conflict, the Houthis gained control of significant territory, transforming Yemen into one of the most complicated war zones in the Middle East. Various geopolitical analyses suggest that connections between the Houthis and Iran grew stronger over time. These relationships reportedly involved military advising, technical support, and other forms of strategic cooperation. Yet the significance of Yemen goes beyond the internal dynamics of its civil war. What matters is how Yemen fits into the wider regional structure. When the Houthi movement began developing missile and drone capabilities, the nature of the conflict started to shift. These technologies allowed them to project influence beyond local battlefields. Strategic infrastructure, shipping routes, and regional security calculations all became potential targets of influence. At certain moments, tensions related to the Yemeni conflict even raised concerns about the safety of shipping lanes in the Red Sea. Any disruption to this area carries global consequences because the route links Europe, Asia, and Africa through the Suez Canal and surrounding maritime corridors. When we place Yemen on the same map as Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, and Syria, the full scale of the structure becomes easier to see. This network stretches across multiple types of strategic terrain. Some fronts lie along land corridors connecting several countries. Others sit near major border regions where regional powers compete for influence. Still others occupy maritime choke points capable of affecting global trade. Each location serves a different role. Lebanon represents a powerful military front near Israel's northern border. Iraq and Syria form a corridor linking several theaters together. Gaza functions as a highly sensitive pressure point within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yemen sits beside one of the world's most important shipping routes. Together these locations create a system that reaches across a vast geopolitical landscape. But this brings us to the most important question of all. Why would a country spend decades building such a network? Why invest so much time, effort, and resources constructing relationships across multiple countries and conflict zones? When we examine the strategy carefully, a broader lesson begins to emerge. To understand why such a network took shape, we must think about the realities faced by nations operating in a competitive international system. Some countries possess enormous economies, massive armies, and advanced technological advantages. Others operate under heavy pressure, surrounded by stronger rivals and facing the possibility of confrontation with far more powerful adversaries. In such situations, direct confrontation does not always favor the weaker side. If a country with fewer resources attempts to challenge a stronger opponent through traditional warfare, the outcome often depends on the size of armies, access to advanced weapons, and the strength of national economies. Under those conditions, the battlefield usually favors the side with greater industrial capacity and technological superiority. Because of this imbalance, alternative strategies often emerge. Iran developed what many analysts describe as a form of indirect power projection. Instead of relying on large-scale invasions or direct military occupation, influence expanded through partnerships with movements already active across the region. These groups pursued their own local struggles and political goals. Yet through cooperation, training, and shared strategic interest, they also became connected within a wider regional environment. When we examine the map again, stretching from Lebanon in the north to Gaza along the Mediterranean, extending eastward through Iraq and Syria, and then reaching south toward Yemen, a pattern becomes visible. This arrangement creates several pressure points across the Middle East. If tensions rise in one area, influence can appear in another. Events in Gaza can affect security calculations in Lebanon. Instability in Yemen can shape discussions about maritime security in the Red Sea. Developments in Iraq or Syria can alter the strategic balance across the entire corridor connecting these theaters. Conflicts therefore stop existing in isolation. Instead of one battlefield, planners must consider several at once. Strategists often describe this condition as multi-front leverage. When multiple theaters connect within the same system, any rival considering direct confrontation faces a far more complicated situation. A conflict with one actor could trigger reactions across several regions simultaneously. Military planners must prepare for a chain of consequences spreading across different geographic fronts. This complexity changes the nature of strategic calculations. Decisions about war or escalation require consideration of not just one battlefield but an entire network of possible responses. And this is where an important lesson emerges for Africa and for nations across the global south. For many decades, discussions about power focus mainly on two measures, the size of a nation's army and the wealth of its economy. Countries were taught to measure strength in terms of tanks, aircraft, and national budgets. But modern geopolitics shows that another dimension of power exists. Influence can grow through networks, partnerships, and long-term strategic thinking. Nations that cultivate relationships across regions can shape events even without deploying massive armies abroad. Patience becomes a strategic asset. Relationships built over many years can eventually reshape the balance of power within entire regions. When we step back and observe the full picture, we realize the story extends beyond the Middle East itself. It represents a lesson about strategy. Iran did not simply form relationships with movements across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Gaza, and Yemen. Over decades, it constructed a system allowing influence to travel across borders without requiring permanent military occupation. That structure is what gives the network its strength. And this is why people across Africa and throughout the global south should pay close attention to these developments. For too long, many nations were encouraged to believe that strength depends only on visible military power or economic wealth. Yet the modern world demonstrates something different. Power also grows through strategic patience, alliances, coordination, and the ability to think decades ahead. When we observe global conflicts, we are not only watching wars between distant countries. We are witnessing demonstrations of how nations attempt to protect their interests and maintain sovereignty in a competitive international environment. Every conflict carries lessons about strategy. And if Africa seeks to strengthen its position in the future, it must also begin thinking in long-term terms. Unity between nations, strategic awareness, and careful geopolitical planning will play an important role in shaping the continent's place in the global order. The world is changing, and the nations that understand these deeper patterns of power will be the ones most prepared to navigate the challenges of the future.